Welcome back. For those of you who didn't join us in the first video, here's a quick summary of what you missed.
I think he's lying. Is that a gram?
New card. What do you think?
Slams hard into the outside.
Bit too early, clipping the apron and causing a mess.
Hey, bro, watch your jet. Watch your jet, bro. Watch your jet! No!
The two of them drift through the corner, taking up the entire track and these trucks looked a lot like your mom the way they were throwing those rear ends around. So far, this has been my best season to date, and if I could keep up the momentum, I was confident that I could come out on top.
Whoa, very nice. Look at that.
It's very cool, Bateman, but that's nothing. Look at this.
That is really nice.
We left off last video with a pretty considerable points lead in the first quarter of the season. With 9 races to go, I was confident that all I had to do was maintain this pace and I could win the championship no problem. And that's exactly what we did, as we continued to crush the competition and run away with the championship. Ladies and gentlemen, I have received news that we in fact did not run off into the sunset with the championship.
What? It's just an ordinary crabby... Oh my goodness!
Yep. Despite our best efforts, through sheer determination, willpower, and divine intervention, Drew would go on to win 3 of the next 5 races in the championship. Never mind, he managed to win those 3 back to back to back. Meanwhile, I was racking up subpar finishes and even missed the Phoenix race completely due to this awful thing called life. This meant that the lead that we had built up in the first 3 races has all but vanished, and now we sit 41 points behind Drew, with Greg hot on our heels for second. By race 9, we've been beaten and slapped silly, but I didn't hear no bell. Now we find ourselves at Darlington, one of the hardest tracks to pass on the NASCAR calendar. One small misplaced step, and BAM! Your race is over. Needless to say, a lot of people despise and dread this track, but I for one, love it. It suits my driving style of consistency and treating the wall like it's my in-laws and avoiding it at all costs. However, while I do like the track, leading up to this round, I've never actually finished on the lead lap. Every time I come here, it seems like I get wrapped up in someone else's wreck. I mean shit, the last 2 times I've raced here, I DNF'd because someone in the front row missed a shift, causing a huge pileup before we even made it to the green flag. Here's a little secret. I am no Mr. Saturday. By this I mean I've never qualified on the pole in the entirety of the time that I've been with the league, but today felt different. For one, Mr. Slapnuts Drew wasn't able to qualify, and secondly, I actually felt like I could lay down some speed today. When I come across the line, I set a time of 29.500, over a 10th clear of the next fastest car. This was it. I finally managed to set a fastest lap time, only for Brian to beat me by 0.02 of a second. As we take the green flag, I try to open up my corner and give the wall a little smooch in the process. Chris is able to drive underneath me using his swanky new sim rig and takes over second position. I wasn't too bothered though. Honestly, I was happy to just hang back and watch these two for a little while and get a feel for how they were going to race. But on lap 3, the tricky turns of Darlington strike as Kalman and Sylvain misjudge their entries into turn 1 and end up getting together. After getting re-racked for the restart, now we line up on the inside row and make that same dive that Chris did to us at the start of the race. Because the corners are so treacherous, everyone was pretty lenient about giving up positions, knowing how hard it is to race side by side here and not end up in the wall. That's a little bit of foreshadowing. For now, I again decide to post up behind Brian and take it easy for a couple of laps. However, to my surprise, my lax corner entry and exit seemed to be doing wonders, and I just kept getting an amazing drive out of the corners. On lap 19, I take a look to Brian's inside and get ready to show him that Mr. Big Nuts is back in town.
What are you doing?
Hmm?
What are you doing?
Nothing. Me? Just hanging around.
In all actuality, I had a momentary lack of skill and overshot my braking zone. I probably apologized to Brian about 10 times during the race, although looking back at it, the contact wasn't as nearly as hard as I thought it was. It's just really unfortunate that Brian ended up in the wall because of it. With that little bit of action behind us, don't go anywhere because we'll be right back after this short break.
Whopper, 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 Junior, Double, Triple, Whopper, Flame Grill taste with perfect toppers. I rule this day.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's the race. That actually wasn't a joke. We just stayed in front for the rest of the race. Surprisingly, there were no other cautions, and after everything was said and done, we ended the day with an almost 12-second gap to Chris behind. There was a little tomfoolery between some lap cars ahead of me on the last lap, and it definitely made me clench my cheeks just a little bit. But it's with a heavy heart that I also must report that one of these cars involved was the crowd favorite Len. Now this was actually a really big win for us. As unfortunate as it is, Drew caught some early damage and ended the race in 11th. This means that we were able to take a pretty big chunk out of that massive points lead he had. Race 10 brings us to the highly awaited Watkins Glen Holy Fuck Why Are There Right Turns 150. Thanks to Matt who sets up the hosted races, the race would be taking place at the crack of dawn, meaning the track was cold and slippery. This is one of the only races on the calendar where I practice multiple days in advance. I don't like to take the league that seriously, but in this week's case it was a matter of me wanting to finish the race in one piece. After 2 days of practice, I showed up to this race still expecting to be beaten, but I actually felt like I had put some pace underneath me. But oh how very wrong I was. The whole 2 days of practice, I came so close to breaking into the 1 minute 14s to no avail, but without any other benchmark, I thought that was pretty fast. Oh, like I said, how wrong I was. When I joined our pre-practice race, Drew had already cracked into the 1 minute 12 range. However, when qualifying came around, somehow, someway I set my fastest lap time ever, with an almost 1 minute 14 flat, securing me in 6th place on the grid. I felt like due to my quote-unquote monster lap, my position was slightly inflated and I may be defending for a large portion of the race. So instead of dealing with that unnecessary stress, I figured I would just downshift at the wrong time and hand Matt and Randy their rightful positions back. Even now, looking at the replay, I'm not sure what happened there. I may have just had the wheel cranked too far when I downshifted, but I felt like I was well past my regular shifting spot. More than likely, it was just, again, a momentary loss of talent. From here on out, I was getting into my rhythm, hoping not to lose any more positions. I figured that this was about where my race pace was at. Any other road race that I've been at with these guys had me lose positions due to silly mistakes. This race, I would have been happy if I just kept the car straight and on track. However, on lap 7, Randy makes a very interesting call to try to really undercut the field. Keep in mind, this is a 35 lap race, meaning that we weren't even a fourth of the way through yet. Randy must not have been too crazy because 1 lap later, Brian joins him on the short pit strategy. This couldn't have been as a reaction because Brian was far ahead of us, meaning 2 people had this strategy planned in advance. Over the next few laps, Kalman and Matt start to fight, pulling me in even closer. Oh, wait, what's that? It's a wild Drew face sideways on the track. It appears Drew couldn't help but come straight on those big, thick curves with just a little bit too much aggression. Because of this, he pits in order to minimize the time loss. For the next couple of laps, we stay pretty stagnant with Matt and Kalman. For every 10th I gain here, they gain another somewhere else. This was until lap 15 when Matt tried to mount those big voluptuous curves just like Drew. But I mean, can you blame them? Look at these puppies.
You can't keep getting away with it!
After continuing to stay stagnant with Kalman, I plan to cut the race in half and decide to come down pit road on lap 17. With a good pit stop, I noticed that as we come out of the pits, we are far clear of the next car behind, which is Randy. This meant that he didn't gain the time advantage that I thought he would, and now we've got the fresh tires to take us till the end of the race. On lap 25, Drew remembers he's no match for those ultra-wide curbs and does his best to avoid upsetting them again. This allows us to close the gap and barely manage to squeak by. I doubted that this was going to hold him back for long, unless he hurt his tires a little bit too much with that last incident. With 5 laps to go, Drew has closed the distance to me and gets a good run as we head up the hill. At around the same time, I make a mistake and have to jump out of the throttle. Stefan is a lap down directly ahead of us and checks us both up coming through the chicane. Exiting the long right-hander, Drew slips to my inside and outbrakes me into turn 6. We look back to his inside, but to no avail. Now as we start lap 32 of 35, Brian has used the big checkups to catch right back up to us. But wait. At this point, I was very confused. How was Brian now just catching us? It turns out that after his early pit stop on lap 8, he was forced to pit again 2 laps later. I'm not sure if this was due to a speeding penalty or if he forgot to put fuel in the car. Nevertheless, it puts him directly behind us now, and I have to prepare myself to defend the 5th place position. I'm able to hold the place for the next few laps, but Brian got a good run out of the final corner and dives to my inside, completing the pass into turn 1. In hindsight, I probably should have defended the inside, but I wasn't expecting him to make the move and I just didn't want to compromise my exit. 6th is where we'll stay for the rest of the race as we cross the checkered flag 3 laps later. All in all, this wasn't a terrible finish. We only lost out 2 positions to Drew on a day where I figured we would get absolutely blown out of the water. Now admittedly, I must point something out. Throughout this whole season, I was so fixated on Drew and I believed that the championship was going to come down between the 2 of us. But when I took a look at the standings after this race, I saw something that completely changed the game. Randy had overtaken me in the points. The league allows for your 2 worst races to not be counted towards your final points tally, and iRacing's points always show this. So after Watkins Glen, iRacing showed that Randy was ahead of me, and here's why. Last video I mentioned that in order to contend for a championship, you needed consistent top 5 finishes, and Randy had done just that. The difference was that he couldn't make the first 2 races of the season, and these were automatically his drop races. This caused him to look far behind me and Drew in the Sim Racers Hub standings, and allowed him to sneak up on us without even knowing. Coming to the penultimate race of the season, I find myself in what was essentially a must-win situation. This is because I had to try to get enough points to try to close that gap between Randy and Drew. Thankfully, in order to try to help us accomplish this, my 6th place finish from last week meant that I was able to qualify and I managed to slap it on 3rd on the grid. Iowa has never been a track that I was Iowa has never been a track that I've been very fond of, especially in this newer generation of trucks. But this time, it felt a little different. I was running alternate lines and adapting my corner entry to try to find some pace here and there. This eventually pays off because by lap 22, I finally caught up to the rear end of the leaders. Randy gives me the opportunity to go up the inside and I take it, but the thing is, I don't really commit to it. I was more so interested in trying to figure out how Randy would react and how my car would handle on the lower line. In hindsight, I should have pressed the issue a little bit harder than I did. As we pressed on, I began to fall more and more off the pace, and as we neared the pit window, I had Greg in fourth, filling my mirror.
Come over here and kiss me on my hot mouth. I'm feeling romantical.
On lap 50, Randy goes for his customary extremely early undercut, but with how my car is handling, I don't feel like I'll be able to make up the time he'll gain, so the next lap I decide to follow him into the pits to cover him off. But before we make it to pit road, the unthinkable happens.
Put around in the chamber of this gun, and this hammer is cocked. The only way to effectively put it on safe is to put your thumb over it and lower the hammer. Well, you know what's coming. If my thumb slips off this
Greg mistakenly thinks that I'm trying to block him on the low line and moves even lower to try to get underneath me. In his defense, I didn't call out that I was pitting. I assumed that he would notice that this was my intention because up until this point I had not come off of the top line in 3 and 4. Nevertheless, the small smack on the ass was enough to push the car wide with too much momentum to make pit road, and I end up face first in the barrier. Now you may be thinking to yourself, that didn't look too bad, it could have been a lot worse. And while that may be true, the final nail in the coffin came when I tried to shift gears while driving down pit road. This issue didn't come from the sim or the smack on the wall. No, it came from none other than my sweet loving daughter. You see, I use a shifter that I fully designed and 3D printed, and I think it's one of the coolest things I've ever made. But my lazy ass never made a cover for the wires that actually allow it to shift. This means that my toddler will occasionally bebob into my room, play on the sim rig, and then yank the wires out of my shifter. Naturally, all in a day's work. Except this time, I guess she tugged on them just enough so that they still worked throughout practice and quali, but when I shifted into reverse after the crash, it knocked them fully loose. This caused the car to refuse to downshift into the correct gear until I reattached the connection, but even that came with its own set of challenges. I do all my sim racing in VR, which is great for depth perception and immersion, but not so great when you have to try to reattach a tiny wire. So not only was I trying to drive down pit road and hit my box, but I was essentially finger my shifter trying to get the wire reattached. With all this said and done, I really only lost 2 places, but I lost them on an undercut strategy, meaning that now I had no time advantage compared to everyone else, and I had to run about 5 to 10 laps longer on my set of tires. Needless to say, the rest of the race did not go well. We ended up falling all the way back to 8th place, with both Randy and Drew finishing ahead of us. As a small caveat, I did have some of the best racing of my life with James and Drew as I tried desperately to hold them back. I don't even have time to cover our battle because it lasted for 22 laps straight. While the race winner wasn't Drew, but instead his brother Nick, him making his way around me pretty much cemented my 3rd place finish in the championship. On top of this, Randy's consistency prevails again as he lands a solid second place finish, pushing him into the lead of the championship going into the final race. Finally, after 2 videos, the birth of my second daughter, and now my second fight with COVID, we've made it to the season finale at Dover. After a series of ups and downs, it comes down to 2 drivers, Drew and Randy. Randy leads by a couple of points over Drew. This means that he doesn't need to actually beat Drew, he just needs to finish close enough in order to win the championship. As some fun added tension, Drew was able to qualify for the final race and managed to smack it directly on pole with me looming on his outside. Meanwhile, Randy has to start at the tail end of the field and try to make his way through the riffraff to secure his championship. As we take the green flag, Drew flexes his unreal speed and begins to drive off into the sunset. At the same time, Randy wastes literally no time at all, and for 4 laps straight makes at least 1 pass every single corner. While most of these guys weren't putting up much of a fight, it's still crazy the raw speed Randy was able to showcase. What was your favorite yellow Breaking Bad connoisseur doing during all this? Hang on, we gotta rewrite this. I can't fucking say it. Doing while this was happening? What was your favorite yellow Breaking Bad connoisseur doing while this was happening? I was riding around in second place, focusing all my attention to the long run speed of the car. That was until lap 10 when Dustin decided I was too slow for his liking. Before I know it, Randy was right behind me and forced me to pick up my pace to try to regain the spot from Dustin. On lap 20, I make my move on Dustin coming out of turn 4. It wasn't an easy pass by any means. When you look at my line, I had been entering high and driving the car off the bottom of the corner. This meant that when I went to Dustin's inside, the car wasn't happy with me because I had to force it to stay on that low line and didn't let it go up to the top where I had been wearing the tires in. You may also question why I simply didn't just let Randy by during all this. Truthfully, I wasn't 100% out of the championship. If both Randy and Drew managed to spontaneously combust and finish in the last 2 positions, I may have been able to scrap just enough points to win the championship. Because of this, I decided I wouldn't simply pull over for either of them, and if they wanted around me, they were going to have to work for it. Looking back towards the front at around the same time Randy and I were trying to get around Dustin, Drew has a lapse of judgment and forgets that the wall won't move no matter how fast you drive at it. The contact with the wall must have been his toe link because 25 laps later, myself and Randy finally managed to catch up. With the 2 of us looming in his mirror, Drew decides to cut his losses and make a ridiculous early pit stop to try to fix his damage and avoid an on-track battle with the 2 of us behind him. But tragedy strikes for Drew, because as he goes to enter the pits, he unsettles his car as he gets onto the apron and almost ends up like me last race. Next lap, Drew goes to redo his pit entry, and this time he makes yet another uh-oh and ends up copying my world-renowned move. On lap 52, Randy finally finds his way to my inside and drives around me like I'm standing still. After the pit cycle is said and done, he pulls an even bigger margin for the next 20 laps as I try to run him down. But on lap 87, Dustin and Kalman have a moment coming out of turn 4, causing our first caution in 3 races. This causes the entire field to come down for fresh tires, and by some miracle, Drew managed to keep himself on the lead lap after this whole pit road fiasco. And not only that, but he managed to beat me off pit road for second place. Coming to the green, I thought maybe, just maybe, the two of them will end up getting together and let me cruise on by for the win. In the next few laps, Drew and Randy lay down the fastest times of the race and demonstrate that they are both truly in a class of their own. On lap 97, Drew makes a move to Randy's inside as the 8 machine gives the wall a little kiss. Drew manages to clear Randy and at this point never looks back. Despite all odds, Drew was able to pry the win right from Randy's hands. But sadly for Drew, it wasn't quite enough for the end goal. Despite winning 5 out of 12 races with an average finish of 5.6, Drew wasn't able to grab the illustrious second championship. Instead, consistency proved king, and Randy was able to snag his first championship with 2 wins and an unprecedented average of 3.4. Even though I ended up fumbling what could have been my first championship, I still had a great time. The racing with this group is bar none and the respect they show is incomparable. I've mentioned last video that this season is quite dated, which is even truer now. So much so that at the release of this video, actually at the recording of this video, we've already started season 11. Keep in mind that this is season 9, not 10. Just like I said last video, if you're interested in catching any of these races live, I've linked the drivers who stream the league on a regular basis. Hopefully now you've got a better idea of who everyone is, and maybe there's someone you'd like to ride on board with. Additionally, if you think that you'd like to come and drive fake cars with us, the league's website will also be included in the description. Thank you all again for sticking around, and I can't wait to drag you down another road of misery in the next video. Until then.
What do you think? Nice. Jesus. That is really super. How'd a nitwit like you get so tasteful? Let's see Paul Allen's card.
The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my God. It even has a watermark.
Something wrong? Patrick? You're sweating.